My name's Adam. I'm 26 now, but this story starts when I was 17, the kind of age where you're just old enough to know what you want, but still too young for anyone in your family to take you seriously. At least, that's how it was in my house. I grew up in a cramped three-bedroom outside of Cincinnati, the kind of place where dreams felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. My parents, Mike and Angela, were both born and raised in the same neighborhood we lived in. My mom worked front desk at a dental clinic, and my dad bounced between contracting jobs and long stretches of unemployment that he blamed on the system or unfair competition. My older sister, Sarah, was the golden child, pretty, popular, and married to some local car dealership manager by the time she was 21. She never left the city limits except for beach vacations or weddings. And me? I was the quiet kid, the one with posters of cities on my wall and language books stacked under my bed. The one who, apparently, was always trying too hard. It started with a comment at dinner. I remember it clear as day. We were eating spaghetti, cheap, overcooked, with the sauce from a can, and I told them I wanted to study abroad for college. I'd been researching scholarships and grants for months in secret. I'd even started practicing Italian on my own. I was nervous to bring it up, but I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me. Instead, my mom laughed, actually laughed, and said, "That's for kids with connections, not you." My dad shook his head and muttered something about getting ideas above my station. Sarah snorted and added, "What? You think you're going to be some international hotshot now? Please." I felt my face burn, not from embarrassment, but from something colder. The kind of disappointment that settles into your ribs and makes it hard to breathe. I didn't even finish my plate. I just excused myself, went to my room, and stared at my ceiling for hours. That was the first time I realized I wasn't just on my own. I was actively being held back. They didn't believe in me, not even a little. Worse, they didn't want me to do better than them. They wanted me to stay in that small town, pick up a trade, maybe marry a waitress, and eventually inherit my dad's rusted toolbox like it was some kind of heirloom. But I didn't say anything. Not then. I smiled the next morning. I went to school. I helped my dad clean the garage that weekend like nothing had happened. But something had. A switch flipped. I started saving every penny I could. I got a job at the local grocery store, bagging groceries after school and stocking shelves until midnight on Fridays. I tutored kids in math on the weekends. I sold old books and electronics on Craigslist. Every dollar I earned went into a hidden shoebox duct-taped beneath the floorboard under my bed. I kept my grades up, applied to every scholarship I could find, and when rejection letters came in, because plenty did, I didn't let them break me. The few that were promising, I followed up on. I wrote essays. I made calls. I hustled in a way my family never saw because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of watching me struggle. At home, things got colder. They noticed I was pulling away, but they chalked it up to teenage mood swings. I stopped asking for help. I paid for my own clothes, my own books, even my own phone plan. When I finally got accepted into a study abroad program in Florence, with a nearly full-ride scholarship, I didn't even tell them until the plane ticket was booked and I had my visa in hand. The night I told them, I sat them down in the living room. My dad was half watching a rerun of Pawn Stars, and my mom was scrolling through Facebook. I said it straight. I got into a university in Italy. I leave in August. There was a silence. A long one. My dad paused the TV. My mom blinked, like I'd spoken in another language. Sarah, who happened to be visiting with her baby on her hip, just said, "You're joking." "No," I said. "I worked for it. I leave in 2 months." My dad scoffed. "So what? You're just gonna abandon your family? Go run off to Europe like some spoiled brat?" Spoiled. That was rich. I hadn't asked them for a dime. Not once. "You think you're better than us?" my mom asked. Her voice had that edge, that simmering resentment I'd started to recognize over the years. "You think going off to some fancy school makes you something special?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, calm, collected. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head, but in real life, it felt sad. Not victorious. Not yet. The months leading up to my departure were tense. My dad refused to talk to me. My mom kept dropping passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty and kids these days forgetting where they come from. Sarah told anyone who'd listen that I was running away from responsibility and abandoning the people who raised me. But I left. I got on that plane with nothing but 2 suitcases and a folder of documents tucked against my chest like a shield. And for the first time in my life, I breathed air that didn't feel like it was suffocating me. The years flew by. Florence became home. I learned Italian. I made friends. I got a degree in international relations and picked up side gigs translating for tourists and consulting for travel companies. I didn't get rich, not yet, but I built a life. One where I didn't feel like a disappointment or a burden. I sent the occasional email home, out of obligation more than anything, but they were always short and stiff. No one visited. No one asked me how I was doing. Not really. Then last month, I got an email from Sarah with the subject line, "Emergency, please call home." I ignored it. 2 days later, another one came through. This time from my mom. "Adam, it's important. Please, call me." I hesitated. Something in me wanted to delete it, but I didn't. I called. The voice on the other end was brittle, trying to sound warm, but faltering. "Hi, honey," my mom said. "How are you?" It was the first time she'd called me that in years. "I'm fine," I said. "What's going on?" She sighed, dragging it out like she was summoning the courage to confess something. "It's your Uncle Rick. He's in trouble. It's been on the news. It's embarrassing." I raised an eyebrow. "Okay." "He was arrested. Some sort of fraud thing. It's all over the local channels. It's making our whole family look bad." I stayed silent. She continued. "Your dad and I were thinking, maybe it's time you came home. Maybe if people saw how well you've done, if you were around again, it could help repair the family name." I nearly laughed. After all these years, after everything they said, now they wanted me to come back and be their PR fix? "Come home, Adam," she said again. "We need you." I didn't answer. Not right away. My heart was pounding, not out of fear, but something else. Something colder. I didn't give my mom an answer on that call. I told her I'd think about it, which, in fairness, was more than she ever gave me growing up. After I hung up, I just stood there in my little one-bedroom apartment, staring at the cracked paint on the windowsill while the Florence traffic murmured outside. A Vespa buzzed down the street, and church bells chimed somewhere off in the distance, echoing like a heartbeat. That city had become more of a family to me than my blood ever had. The idea of going back, of stepping foot into that decaying house where ambition went to die? No, but still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because I wanted to help them. I didn't. But I needed to understand what they were really after. I did a little digging. Turns out my Uncle Rick had been involved in a construction grant scandal. He'd falsified documents and pocketed over $600,000 from a local development program meant to renovate housing for veterans. It was national news. His mugshot was plastered everywhere, and the community backlash was brutal. He'd been the upstanding family man of our town for decades, deacon at the church, Little League coach, president of the Rotary Club. And now he was facing a dozen federal charges. The thing is, Rick wasn't just some uncle I barely knew. He was my dad's older brother. The favorite. The one everyone bragged about. My dad used to say, "You should be more like your Uncle Rick." He built something of himself. I guess that something was an empire of lies. I figured that was the end of it, until the third email came. This time from Sarah. She didn't waste time pretending to care. "Adam, come home. It's not a request. Mom and Dad are being dragged through the mud. People are questioning the whole family. You living overseas makes it look like we're running. If you cared at all, you'd show up and prove we're not a bunch of cowards." There it was. The real reason. They didn't want me. They wanted the optics of me. Their estranged son, the one who made it, to serve as a human press release. Proof that the Johnsons weren't just a bunch of crooks and losers. I ignored it. But then came the letter. A physical envelope. Handwritten. No return address. It showed up at my doorstep, care of my university's alumni office. Inside was a note from my dad. Short, sloppy handwriting. "Adam, you're still part of this family whether you like it or not. Don't forget who paid for your roof and food for 18 years. You owe us. Show your face. Do the right thing. Dad." I sat with that letter for a long time. Reread it over and over. The part that stuck with me wasn't the guilt tripping. It was the word, "oh." That word had been used my whole life. I owed them for clothes, for school, for feeding me, like existing was some kind of debt I could never repay. I never asked to be born. I earned my way out. But that didn't matter to them. My freedom was something I'd stolen in their eyes. And still, I went. Not because I forgave them. Not because I wanted to help. but because something in me wanted to look them in the eyes and see if they'd changed, or if I was just another pawn on the family chessboard. Plus, part of me wanted to see the fallout up close, like slowing down at a crash site. When I landed in Cincinnati, it was gray and cold. Mid-November. I hadn't told anyone my flight time. I Ubered straight to a hotel, not home. That house wasn't mine anymore. The next morning, I texted Sarah that I was in town. She responded instantly, like she'd been waiting for confirmation I wouldn't back out. Come by the house at 5. Everyone will be there. That should have been my first red flag. When I showed up, it was like stepping into a weird alternate reality. The same beige siding on the house. The same cracked driveway. But the air felt tighter, as if the walls themselves were bracing for something. I walked through the front door and was immediately met with fake smiles. My mom hugged me like we hadn't spent years avoiding each other. My dad gave me one of those stiff nods like we were coworkers meeting in a break room. Then I saw them. Extended family, aunts, cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in a decade. All crammed into the living room. Food on paper plates, wine in plastic cups. Like it was a party. Turns out, it kind of was. They'd thrown a family dinner in my honor. But it didn't take long to realize it was a PR stunt. My mom introduced me to everyone as our Adam, our international scholar, our pride. She left out the part where they tried to sabotage every step I took to get there. My dad clapped me on the back and said, "See, this is what I've always wanted. Family back together." I smiled, nodded, and sipped the cheap wine. I played along. But I watched everything. Every conversation. Every side-eye. Every time someone brought up the scandal and then looked at me like I was supposed to fix it with my presence. Then came the moment that cracked it all open. I was in the kitchen, refilling my glass, when Sarah pulled me aside. She looked nervous. Sweaty. "Hey," she said. "So, we need a favor." Of course they did. She continued. "There's a community meeting next week. The press will be there. We're trying to show the town that the family still has some integrity. We want you to speak." "Speak?" I asked. "Yeah. About your accomplishments. Your degree. Your work overseas. Show them the Johnson name still means something. You're the success story, Adam. You're the one that made it." I stared at her. "I'm not your shield," I said. She laughed nervously. "Come on. It's just a few words. You don't even have to mention Rick. Just talk about how proud you are to be a Johnson." That did it. I leaned in and said, "You all spent years making me feel like garbage. Mocking me. Ignoring me. Acting like I was some mistake. And now, because your golden uncle tanked the family name, you want me to sweep it all up?" Sarah blinked. "Adam, this isn't the time for a pity party. This is about family." I walked away without responding. But it wasn't over. 2 days later, I found out they'd gone behind my back. I got a call from a local reporter. She said she was confirming my appearance at the town forum next week, that she'd been told I'd be speaking on behalf of the family. I never agreed to that. Turns out, Sarah had sent out an email blast to local news outlets, announcing that Adam Johnson, international consultant and former Florence scholar, would be making a public statement of support for the Johnson family. I was livid. I called her immediately. "You used my name without permission," I said. "We needed to get ahead of this," she replied. "You don't understand how bad things are here. People are pulling away from us. Our family name is a punchline. And you think dragging me into it fixes that? You OWE us, Adam," she snapped. "After everything we did for you. The house. The food. The clothes. You wouldn't have survived without us." I paused, then said, "You're right. I survived you." And I hung up. I should have left then. But I didn't. Because at that point, it wasn't about escaping. It was about making sure they never tried to use me again. After that phone call with Sarah, I didn't slam the phone or yell. I didn't storm into their house or write some dramatic post on social media. I just sat down on the edge of the hotel bed, stared at my reflection in the black TV screen across the room, and let the silence press in. That was the moment I fully realized it. How little they knew me. How badly they'd miscalculated. They still thought I was the same scared, approval-hungry kid who used to hide library books under his mattress. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I'd changed. Grown. But they hadn't. Not one bit. And still, part of me cracked. Because for all the strength I'd built, all the distance I'd put between myself and their toxicity, standing in the middle of it again chipped away at my composure. It wasn't just what they'd done. It was how effortlessly they slid back into their old roles. "Sarah, still acting like the queen of the family even after her life had stalled out in the same suburban rut. My mom, smiling through gritted teeth while manipulating everyone around her. My dad, bitter and silent unless he had something venomous to say. And all of them so quick to pretend none of it ever happened. No apologies, no accountability, just fake smiles and backhanded praise when it was convenient for them. And now, they were parading my name around like a trophy they'd earned. They hadn't earned a thing. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about that call from the reporter, about Sarah signing me up for a speech I never agreed to, about the way my dad's letter had framed everything like a transaction. I owed them. That word again. Like I was a loan they regretted taking out. The next morning, I called the reporter back. I calmly told her that I had not agreed to speak at the forum, and that any announcement stating otherwise was false. She was understanding, though clearly disappointed, said she'd reached out for comment from the family, and that Sarah had confirmed everything. I told her to check her facts before printing anything else. Then I hung up, and that was when I realized I couldn't just walk away. Not this time. Walking away had been my first escape. But this time, I needed to take something with me. My dignity, my narrative, my power. But before I could rebuild anything, I had to hit bottom. And it happened faster than I thought. 3 days later, I got an email from my former university's scholarship board. A brief, polite message. It had come to their attention that I had publicly aligned with a high-profile fraud scandal involving my family, and they wanted clarification. They attached an anonymous tip. Someone had sent them a link to a small-town news blog that featured Sarah's fake announcement, along with a photo of me at the family dinner. That dinner had been carefully staged, I realized. She'd probably taken a photo without me noticing and passed it off as a reunion event with my full support. The article claimed I was standing in solidarity with my family during a difficult time. I sat there staring at the screen, heat rising up my spine. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was reputation sabotage. I spent years building a name abroad, with my own sweat and sacrifice. And now, because my family was desperate to clean up their image, they were dragging me down with them. I tried to call Sarah. No answer. I messaged her, take down the article. Now, or I will. She left me on read. That week was brutal. I spent every day fielding awkward emails from old classmates, colleagues in Florence, even my boss from the tourism startup I freelanced for. All of them asking, some politely, some not, why I was suddenly involved in a scandal back home. It didn't matter that I hadn't done anything. The association alone was enough. For a few days, I completely shut down. I canceled meetings. Didn't respond to texts. I stayed holed up in my hotel room, alternating between anger and exhaustion, flipping between local news and silence, wondering if I'd made a mistake coming back at all. I thought about just flying back to Italy, starting over. Again. But something in me wouldn't let go. Because this time, I wasn't 17. I had resources, skills, connections, and I had receipts. It started small. I combed through every email Sarah had sent me, every text, every voicemail. I flagged the one where she admitted to announcing my speech before I agreed. I saved screenshots of the article. I found old social media posts from high school where she publicly mocked me for being obsessed with foreign junk and always acting like he's better than the rest of us. I archived every single time they'd torn me down over the years, and now, every time they try to lift me up for show. Then, I started thinking bigger. I reached out to the alumni association that had helped fund my scholarship. I offered to write a public letter, on my own terms, clarifying the situation, stating that I had no involvement in my uncle's case, and that I was being used by estranged family members without my consent. I didn't want to drag anyone, but I wasn't going to let their lies sit. They agreed. I spent a full weekend drafting the letter. Honest, measured, calm. I talked about my background, about growing up in a house where dreams were ridiculed, about finding my way to Florence, about building a life brick by brick with no support. I didn't name names, but I left no room for interpretation. I sent it. They published it on the university's blog. And then something unexpected happened. It got picked up. A small educational newsletter reposted it. Then a travel blog. Then a LinkedIn editor reached out and asked if they could run a feature on students who broke away from toxic roots and found global success. I agreed. I told my story. All of it. Within 2 weeks, I'd gone from being a local supporter of a fraud family to an accidental symbol of resilience. And it didn't stop there. A professor from my old program in Florence reached out, said he saw the article, and invited me to guest lecture at a workshop for students navigating difficult family dynamics. I said yes. A recruiter from a nonprofit messaged me. They worked with kids from broken homes who wanted to study abroad but didn't know where to start. They asked if I'd be open to consulting. I said yes to that too. I was rebuilding. But this time, not in spite of my past, because of it. Still, I didn't forget what got me here. And I wasn't done. Sarah finally texted me after the blog post hit 1,000 shares. Really? You had to drag us through the mud like that? I didn't respond. Then came the real kicker. My mom called me, voice trembling. We saw the article, she said. You're embarrassing us. People are starting to ask questions about what we did to you. Can't you just let the past go? That was rich. Let it go. I said. You mean like how you let me go every single time I needed you growing up? She sniffled. You're not being fair. I let that hang there for a second. Then I said, neither were you. But at least I'm being honest. She hung up. I hadn't spoken to my father at all since arriving. I assumed he'd never call. And I was right. But then, a week later, I got a knock on the hotel door. It was him, standing there in his battered, old leather jacket, looking smaller than I remembered. Older, like the weight of everything had finally started dragging him down. Got a minute? He asked. I stepped aside. He walked in, slow and silent, like he wasn't sure he'd be welcomed. He didn't sit, just stood there, arms crossed, staring out the window. I didn't know Rick was doing all that, he said. I swear. I didn't answer. He glanced at me. You embarrassed the whole family. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not you were right. Just you made us look bad. I shook my head. I didn't embarrass anyone. I just told the truth. He scowled. Sometimes the truth should stay in the family. I almost laughed. Like when you told me I'd never make it. That I was just a burden. He didn't reply. That silence told me everything. He didn't come to apologize. He came to guilt me. One last attempt to pull me back into the cycle. I stepped closer. Calm. Steady. You know what I owe you, Dad? I said. Nothing. Not a dime. Not a speech. Not my silence. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, but I cut him off. You don't get to use me anymore. None of you do. And I walked to the door. He stood there for a moment longer, then muttered, You'll regret this. I smiled. I already did. For years. He left. And that was the last time I saw him. But it wouldn't be the last time they heard from me. The funny thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always leave a scar you can see. Sometimes, it sits beneath your skin like an ember, quiet, glowing, waiting. And when the wind hits just right, it flares back to life. That's how I felt after my father's visit. After Sarah's silence. After my mother's guilt-wrapped phone call. I thought I was done with them, that I'd already climbed out of that hole. But standing in the middle of their wreckage, I realized I'd just been watching from the sidelines. And it was time to stop watching. I didn't want revenge for the sake of petty satisfaction. I didn't need to ruin them. They were doing a great job of that themselves. No, what I wanted was clarity. I wanted the truth to stand taller than their lies. I wanted to take back the narrative they tried to write for me, and then quietly, surgically, dismantle the foundation they'd built their fake pride on. But if I was going to do this, I had to be smart. I had to prepare. I started with information. Over the next week, I tapped into everything I'd learned in Italy, research, diplomacy, social strategy. First, I called a friend from university, Luca, who now worked for a nonprofit dealing with public transparency and corruption reporting. I told him everything. The scandal, the fake family rebranding, the news articles. He was fascinated. Adam, he said, you're sitting on a gold mine of hypocrisy. If you want to expose them, all you need is the right platform. He offered to connect me with a small network of independent journalists who specialized in family-connected fraud cases, people not tied to corporate media, people who listen. But I wasn't quite ready to go public. Not yet. First, I needed proof. Tangible, undeniable, boring proof. The kind you can't PR spin your way out of. So I did what no one expected. I went to visit Uncle Rick. He was out on bail and staying at home until trial. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up at his house with a manila folder and a portable recorder in my pocket. He looked surprised to see me. Suspicious. Adam, he said, peeking through the screen door. Didn't think you were the visiting type. I'm not, I replied. But I've got a proposition. He opened the door wider, slowly. I'm listening. I want your side of the story, I said. The real one. Not the one your lawyers are pushing. Not the one the press is spinning. Yours. On the record. He frowned. Why? I shrugged. Let's just say I'm writing a piece. I've got some connections. And unlike your brother and his kids, I'm not here to pretend this never happened. That got his attention. He let me in. We sat at his kitchen table, still covered in mail, a few unopened bills, a half-finished crossword, and I hit record. He started slow, cautious. But as I asked more pointed questions, he opened up. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe he thought I was the only one who actually wanted to listen. But he gave me everything. He talked about how the grant fraud started, how it wasn't his idea at first, how he got pulled in by a city official who later flipped on him. He talked about the bookkeeping tricks, the fake invoices, the money that passed through the family. That part made me pause. What do you mean, passed through the family? He hesitated, then leaned back. Let's just say, your dad wasn't as innocent as he's pretending to be. I didn't flinch, just nodded slowly. Go on. He did. Turns out my father had invested in one of the fake renovation companies Rick created. A shell corporation that did no work, filed no taxes, but funneled enough cash into the Johnson household to finance a brand new kitchen 2 years ago, complete with granite counters and custom cabinetry. I remembered that remodel. My mom had bragged about it nonstop on Facebook. Why'd he do it? I asked. He always acted like he hated you. Rick snorted. He hates that he's not me, that he couldn't pull it off himself. But he never turned down a check. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind. Rick never explicitly admitted guilt. He was too careful for that, but he danced right on the edge. Enough to give me a map. Enough to confirm that my father wasn't just complicit in the lie. He was a beneficiary. I left with 2 things, the recording and a photocopy of a suspicious invoice Rick gave me from the contractor who remodeled my parents' kitchen. It listed a job done for Johnson Household Renovation Package C, dated during the height of Rick's grant skimming period. I took it all back to my hotel and spent the rest of the night connecting dots. Next, I contacted a former classmate from high school, Melissa. She now worked in local government. We hadn't spoken since graduation, but I reached out anyway, explained the situation, and asked if she could pull up records on the city contracts Rick's companies had received. Adam, she said, this is dicey. Why do you want this? I'm protecting myself, I said. They've used my name once already. I won't let them do it again. She hesitated, but eventually agreed to help. 2 days later, she emailed me a zipped file of public contracts, most of which were redacted, but a few hadn't been updated yet. I cross-referenced every address, every company name, every contractor ID. I built a spreadsheet. I highlighted overlaps, patterns, links to my father's private Venmo transactions that were still public. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't dramatic. But it was solid. And I wasn't done. The next step was leverage. I called Sarah. She didn't answer, of course. So I sent her a simple message. We need to talk. Now. Or the next article with my name in it will include yours. She replied within 5 minutes. We met at a diner on the edge of town. She showed up in full damage control mode. Hair done, sunglasses, that same smug half-smile she used to wear in high school when she'd lie to our teachers and get away with it. Adam, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. You're being dramatic. I placed the folder on the table. Slowly, deliberately. Inside, I said, is everything you've been trying to bury under this fake family unity crap. The fraudulent company. The money trail. Dad's remodel invoice. Rick's near confession. Your emails to the press. Do I need to go on? Her face changed. Not all at once. Just slowly. Like a mask melting in the sun. I don't know what you think you're doing, she said quietly. I'm doing what you should have done years ago, I said. Cleaning house. She glanced at the folder. Is this a threat? I leaned forward. No. It's a choice. You want to keep parading the Johnson name around like it's a badge of honor? Fine. But from now on, you do it without mine. You retract every press release. You make a public statement clarifying that I was used without consent. You remove every post that even mentions me. And you don't speak to me or about me again. Ever. She looked like she wanted to argue. To twist it. To play victim. But I wasn't giving her room. If you don't, I added, I'll leak every bit of this. Not to the tabloids. Not to local gossip blogs. To the IRS. The city council. The fraud watchdogs who already flagged Rick. And trust me, Once they start pulling threads, your husband's dealership loans and dad's side gigs, they won't survive the scrutiny. Silence. Thick and heavy. Finally, she nodded. Just once. You've changed, she said. I smiled. No. I just stopped pretending. By the time I left that diner, everything had changed, not because of a big public scene or some viral moment, but because the balance of power had finally shifted. For years, my family made me feel like I owed them something. Silence, loyalty, invisibility. But now, for the first time, they owed me. And they knew it. I didn't hear from Sarah after that meeting. True to her word, or more likely her fear, she issued a public retraction within 48 hours. A bland, carefully worded Facebook post buried between photos of her kids and a church fundraiser, saying there had been a misunderstanding regarding my involvement with the family's public statements and that she wanted to clarify that I had never agreed to speak on anyone's behalf. The local blog that had picked up the original article edited their piece, adding a half-hearted note about the correction. No apology, but I didn't need one. I had what I came for, public distance. A clean break. But I wasn't done. See, my family had spent their lives building a house of cards made from ego, guilt, and manipulation. I'd spent mine learning how to take things apart. Patiently, quietly, carefully. So that's exactly what I did. A week after Sarah's post went live, I sent a formal report to the City Grant Oversight Committee, attaching a packet of documents. Rick's recorded conversation with me, the suspicious invoice for the kitchen remodel at my parents' house, and a list of shell companies used in the fraud, one of which had my father's signature on a subcontractor's agreement. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't make any accusations I couldn't back up. I just gave them what they needed to look. And then I waited. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd just stirred a pot that would never boil. Maybe they'd get away with it, like they always did. But then, one morning, I woke up to a message from Melissa, my old classmate in City Hall. You might want to check the local news today. I did. The city had announced a formal investigation into all renovation projects linked to Rick's development firm. Multiple addresses were flagged, and one of them, 47 Carver Avenue, my parents' house. They were officially under review for benefiting from a fraudulent contract. It wasn't an arrest. It wasn't handcuffs or sirens. But it was a spotlight, one they couldn't squirm away from. And it was just the beginning. Over the next 2 months, the story snowballed. More people came forward, contractors who hadn't been paid, veterans whose housing projects were delayed or canceled. Local journalists started digging into tax records. That granite kitchen my mom loved to brag about. A photograph of it ended up in a news segment about luxury renovations funded by stolen grants. My father, ever the proud man, refused to talk to the press. But that didn't stop the fallout. The hardware store he worked at quietly removed him from their website and shifted him off customer-facing duties. My mom stopped going to church functions. Sarah's husband, whose car dealership depended on local goodwill, suddenly faced a wave of cancellations and refund requests. Someone had scrawled "thieves" in red paint across the dealership's front window one night. They tried to say it was just vandalism, but everyone knew. Even Uncle Rick, already neck-deep in legal trouble, tried to claim he'd been set up by family. He released a statement through his lawyer denying any involvement in additional contracts, but the damage was done. His plea deal fell through. The prosecution reopened parts of the case. He was eventually hit with 2 more charges for fraud and conspiracy. And me? I flew back to Florence. The day I left, I didn't visit anyone. I didn't tell them I was going. I just left my hotel key at the front desk, boarded my flight, and watched the clouds swallow Ohio. Back in Italy, the world felt lighter, warmer, but not because I was running, because I had finally let it go, on my terms. I threw myself into work. The nonprofit I consulted for offered me a permanent role. I accepted. I started giving workshops for students who came from backgrounds like mine, kids whose families resented their dreams, kids who didn't know how to leave without losing themselves. I helped them build roadmaps. I showed them what survival looked like when it was paired with purpose. I even started writing. The same journalist who had once interviewed me about resilience asked if I'd consider turning my story into a column. I did. It wasn't angry or bitter. It was honest. I talked about small-town roots, about generational pride, about how sometimes family is just a word people hide behind when they want to control you. The article went viral. Emails poured in. People from all over the world, thanking me for saying what they'd never dared to put into words. People who'd escaped, people still trapped. People who said, "Your story gave me courage." I wasn't just healing anymore. I was helping others do the same. And then, months later, I got a letter. Not a text, not an email, a handwritten letter. From my mother. I opened it slowly, expecting guilt or manipulation, maybe a veiled threat or a tear-stained apology. But what I found was worse. It was hollow. "We're disappointed in you," she wrote. "You humiliated us. You could have helped. Instead, you chose to destroy your own family. I hope you're proud of yourself." No mention of what they'd done to me. No acceptance. Just blame. I folded the letter and tucked it in the back of my closet. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that sometimes the closure you're waiting for doesn't come wrapped in an apology. Sometimes it's just a final line in a chapter you're done rereading. I never wrote back. I never visited again. And every year since, when the anniversary of my departure rolls around, I do something small to celebrate. A walk along the river, a glass of wine, a quiet toast to the kid who left with 2 suitcases and a pocket full of doubt. Because that kid, he made it. Without them. Despite them. And in the end, when they tried to drag me back into their mess, when they used my name like a shield, when they demanded silence, I answered with truth. And I never looked back. "You'll regret this," my father once said. He was wrong. They did.